Question number 12, Kevin Hague.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health and asks, is he satisfied that all conflicts of interest that arose by the head of Food and Grocery Council, Katherine, being a member of the Health Promotion Agency, were managed in accordance with the provisions of the Crown Entities Act 2004, if so why?
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman.
Yes, because there's no indication to the contrary.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Kevin Hague.
How specifically has Mrs. Rich or the Health Promotion Agency managed her conflicts when, according to the agency's minutes, she has never, ever recused herself from a discussion or decision of the board, even one involving alcohol, sugar or tobacco?
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman.
Mr. Speaker, I think that's very much the point. I've had the Ministry of Health review all those minutes and they tell me that there's nothing inappropriate in the conduct of any board member in the context of the Crown Entities Act 2004.
Point of order, Kevin Hague.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to table the minutes of the Health Promotion Agency Board from July 2012 to July 2014.
Or leave us to table those particular minutes of the Health Promotion Agency. Is there any objection to those minutes being tabled? No, there's not. They can be tabled.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Kevin Hague.
Does he agree that there is an untenable conflict of interest in the same person who submitted to the Health Select Committee against plain packaging of tobacco, also participating in a health promotion agency discussion aimed at promoting plain packaging of tobacco?
Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman.
No.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Dr. Nick Smith.
To the Minister of Health, what conflict of interest did Green MP Stephen Browning have in advocating homeopathy as a solution to the Ebola epidemic?
Order. Before I rule, I don't believe there's any ministerial responsibility for that question. Supplementary question. Order. Supplementary question, Kevin Hague.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will he ask Health Promotion Agency Chair Lee Mathias why Mrs. Rich was allowed to participate in discussions about junk food, tobacco and alcohol when the Crown Entities Act requires members with conflicts of interest not to take part in any discussion or decision of the board relating to or otherwise participate in any activity of the entity that relates to a matter where a conflict of interest may exist?
Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman.
Mr. Speaker, as I answered earlier, we've had a look at those minutes. They've been reviewed by ministry officials and the advice from them is that there is no conflict.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Kevin Hague.
I seek leave to table what is it, a hard copy version of a PowerPoint from the State Services Commission dated February 2014 explaining to members of Crown Entity Boards what their legal obligations are.
On the basis that it may not be that easily obtainable by members, I'll put the leave us to table that particular hard copy of a PowerPoint presentation. Is there any objection to that piece of paper being tabled? There is not. It can be tabled.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Kevin Hague.
Will he investigate the Health Promotion Agency's management of Mrs. Rich's conflicts, including the role of Health Promotion Agency Chair Lee Mathias, given Ms. Mathias appears to have allowed Mrs. Rich to participate in discussions where her role as a lobbyist conflicts seriously with her role as a health promoter?
Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman.
I disagree with the assertions in that member's question.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Kevin Hague. Order. The member still has a right to ask questions. Kevin Hague, supplementary question.
Does Mrs. Rich retain his confidence, given that she has never, even once, declared a specific interest in any agenda item on Health Promotion Agency agendas, has never recused herself from any discussions or decisions, and clearly has not managed her conflict in accordance with the Crown Entities Act?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Dr. Jonathan
Mr.
Coleman.
Speaker, that's absolutely incorrect. When Katherine Rich applied for that position, or when she was appointed, she declared her potential conflicts of interest, and they were recorded in the Cabinet paper. And my advice to the Green Party is stop focusing on issues that do not advance quality health care for New Zealanders. Start focusing on how we are going to get increased access to quality health care across the population. That's the real issue, and that's what I'm focusing on as Minister of Health.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Megan Woods.
What were the circumstances that led him to receive the direct communication from the chair of the Health Promotions Agency regarding Katherine Rich that he cited in the House last week when he said, "She has always been an ethical member of the board. As chair, I have always had confidence in her contribution"?
Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman.
Speaker, the circumstances were the sustained and ridiculous attacks, personal attacks on Katherine Rich by the Green Party, who prefer to focus on ridiculous stuff like treating Ebola with homeopathy rather than the key issues facing New Zealanders in the pursuit of quality health care.
Question.
Supplementary question, Dr. Megan Woods.
Did he consult with any other organisations or persons regarding the suitability of Katherine Rich on the board of the Health Promotions Agency? If so, which organisations or persons?
Honourable Dr. Jonathan
Mr.
Coleman.
Speaker, her appointment went through a cabinet process and all the appropriate processes were followed.
Supplementary question.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Megan Woods.
Did the Minister consult with any other ministers about the role of Katherine Rich on the board of the Health Promotion Agency? If so, whom?
Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman.
Yes, the Cabinet.
And that concludes questions for all answer. I have received a letter from Kelvin Davis.